All right. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richmond, the foundation's vice president. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. Sheldon, I thought we would talk about the big conference within a conference that we had a couple weeks ago at the annual Students for Liberty Conference. FFF had a program that we presented there to the students that consisted of 7 presentations. They turned out absolutely fantastic. All of them did. We videotaped them all, and the videotapes we're going to be posting on our website and sharing with subscribers to Future of Freedom this week. And we've just gone live today with the big one, the panel that was in the main ballroom. And that panel consisted of Hollywood Academy Award winning director Oliver Stone and his collaborator Peter Kuznick on his Showtime series Untold History, which is an absolutely great 10-part series. And then Jeremy Scahill, who is the producer of this great film called Dirty Wars, which 2 weeks before the panel got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary. So here we have an Academy Award-winning director and an Academy Award nominee and then the collaborator on this great Showtime series, all on our panel. And it was absolutely fantastic, and I'd highly recommend, just for sheer intellectual enjoyment, to take a look at the video of this panel. The panel was great, the Q&A was great, the theme of it was imperial overreach and the national security state. And we'll delve into a little bit more deeply, but Sheldon, let me turn it over to you and give you a little bit of a opportunity to make some introductory remarks about the program and the panel.
Yeah, it was really a really good day. You deserve so much credit for putting this together, getting lots of big names, which we'll mention as we go along here. The image that stays with me, it was, I don't know who took the picture, but it was in the Yahoo News report, and then I put it on Facebook, so it's getting around from a lot of people, is Stone and Jeremy Scahill conversing at the FFF table, right sort of next to and slightly behind a portrait of Ludwig von Mises, which FFF was giving away in a drawing for people who registered for our conference in a conference. So that's an image I think people will remember for a long time. I'd like to think that some of Mises' philosophy somehow made it into the heads of Stone and Scahill. Maybe they heard some talk and chatter or gotten some conversations that will lead them to think about that. Those things where they probably have a lot of disagreement with us, but certainly the time spent exploring the ways they overlap with us on national security, surveillance, and those things was really worthwhile. It was quite a day.
Yeah, it was awesome. To put the portrait in context, it was done by, this portrait of Ludwig von Mises was done by an artist out of Annapolis named Jack Frazier, who's familiar with our work, and he donated the portrait to us for this particular purpose of having students registered our booth, and we had the portrait of Mises up there, and then there was a drawing on Sunday, and a student won the drawing. And during the book signing, where Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick and Jeremy Scahill were signing books, for a moment they were there standing next to this portrait of Mises. So yeah, there is the great portrait. If people would like to see it, on our FFF Daily today and on our website at fff.org, we've posted a list of all the articles that this panel generated, and the publicity is incredible. Washington Post, Fox News, Yahoo News, and I don't know, it looks like a list of about 20 other websites that wrote articles about this panel. It's absolutely amazing. And it was exciting. I mean, it was. We all put together the program. I played a role in this, but our program director Bart Frazier did a fantastic job. Our director of donor relations, Alicia Cannon, was there manning the booth. We had interns. You were there, and I was there, and the whole program was just exciting. You could see here was like 1,500 or so students. 99% of whom are libertarians. And, of course, we were trying to attract a lot of liberal students because of the liberals we included, including this panel. and we don't know how many ended up coming, but we did a lot of promotion to the universities and political science departments here in the D.C. area. And you could just feel the excitement. And so, here we have these major liberals that are up there sharing their perspectives. And we made it clear that, that they weren't going to be addressing economics. We know there's a big difference between libertarians and liberals or progressives on that issue. But we wanted to bring to the students the liberal perspective on civil liberties, and we'll get into the other speakers that we had. So we had a combination of libertarians and liberals. In the past, we had, conservative named Bruce Fine, because while most of the conservatives are horrible on civil liberties and foreign policy, the national security state, Fine is one of those rare conservatives who's very solid. And so while we had panels with a libertarian and a conservative in the past, me and Fine, this year we said, hey, let's bring some more spice to this program and bring some liberals in and expose the students to the liberal perspective on civil liberties, which is right on the same page as we are. Not all liberals, of course, because most liberals caved when Obama came in, and when Obama caved, just like most conservatives caved when George W. Bush came in on civil liberties. But the liberals that we chose to bring to this program have been solid on civil liberties and foreign policy, the national security state. And so these three panelists, I thought, just did a fantastic job bringing this liberal perspective, or which really is a libertarian perspective on civil liberties.
Yeah, it was quite a great panel, and there's some controversy within the panel and between at least one of the panel members and the audience, which I think would be worth our talking about. On the first point, Stone got some headlines and some attention for his when he went after Obama, calling him weak and not standing up to the pressures that wanted to push him to continue policies that were used by the George W. Bush administration. That then led Scahill to be critical. He didn't name Stone or Kuznick in this context, but it seemed clear he was addressing that. He thought it was a little bit disingenuous for progressives now to be claiming that they're upset with Obama. He said Obama had telegraphed his punches long before, the last couple of years, even during his campaign and even in his time in the Senate. And therefore, at this stage, to be saying, oh my gosh, how did I misjudge him? I thought he was a good guy. Scahill was critical of that. That did prompt Kuznick to take it personally and say, well, I don't think we were being disingenuous. And he tried to explain then why they had some hopes for Obama. I have to say I lean towards Scahill in this case. I think definitely Obama had telegraphed his punches.
Yeah, it's funny that you raise that, because my feeling was the exact opposite. I was siding with Stone and Kuznick on that debate, and I thought they made a really valid point that if Obama had been president during the Cuban Missile Crisis, none of us would be standing here today because there had been an all-out nuclear war. And what he was referring to is that at the height of the crisis, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA were putting unbelievable pressure on Kennedy to bomb Cuba and invade Cuba. And if Kennedy had succumbed to that pressure, what they didn't know was that the Soviets had battlefield capable and ready nuclear weapons, and the commanders on the ground had battlefield authority to fire those limited nuclear weapons at invading American troops. And inevitably that would have happened, and so, which of course would have escalated into all-out nuclear war. So, his point was that Kennedy stood up against this military-industrial complex of Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA, under unbelievable pressure from them. And his point was that Obama never would have done that because Obama succumbed to pressure on the civil liberties side. And I have to say, I sided with Stone and Kuznick when they felt betrayed and disillusioned by Obama, because here's a constitutional law professor. During the campaign, he talked about the importance of due process, of giving notice and hearing to people. He was criticizing what the Bush administration was doing on indefinite detention, Guantanamo, and so forth. and then he gets into office and he caves. And my feeling is he caved because of the unbelievable pressure of what I call the fourth branch of government, the national security state branch of the government.
Well, I think what Scale was referring to is that, just for an example, when George W. Bush got caught engaging in wireless surveillance with a New York Times article some years ago, Congress kind of yelled, "Hey, you can't do that. Wait, let us legalize that for you," and passed FISA amendments, which then let him go ahead and do it. Obama voted for that when he was in the Senate. There he was telegraphing his lack of concern with Fourth Amendment matters and civil liberties. So that may be the sort of thing that Scale had in mind. So it's really just an argument about when should you have been disillusioned, back then or more recently.
Right. And
the other.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's that point. Well, I was going to say you probably want to move on to the other point of controversy, which was Stone being challenged because of his history of sympathy for left state socialist authoritarians in Latin America, like the late Hugo Chavez and probably Castro and some others. And of course in Venezuela now things are heating up. There's opposition, but there's also been violence, and there's been a government crackdown. They've arrested the leading dissident. And I guess Stone is on the record of having defended the regime of President Maduro, who succeeded Chavez. And this was a controversy you knew was going to be raised at that panel.
Yeah, I provided a little bit of fireworks at the panel because, we, of course, had invited them to speak on civil liberties and foreign policy, the national security state. But we had alerted them to the possibility that in the Q&A session that students would challenge them on economics, and just to be aware of that. Well, lo and behold, about 2 or 3 days before the conference, 3 students from Latin America post an open letter on the internet taking Stone to task for his support of brutal socialist dictators in Latin America, and specifically in Venezuela, where Maduro had just killed 3 protesting students, and of course all the chaos that the socialist policies have caused. And the students made it clear that they were going to ask Stone about this. And so, we alerted them to that, say, be aware that this is likely to happen. And so sure enough, in the Q&A, the students made their case and presented Stone with the letter, and that's all in the videotape that's now on our website. And so, Stone's response was interesting. I think there's several dimensions to what's going on in Venezuela. We can, digress in that for a minute. That the Venezuelan authorities have kicked out 3 U.S. diplomats, claiming that they're involved in this and in the chaos. And of course, the U.S. denies it. But my impression is that the denial means nothing. I mean, if the U.S. is instigating some of the chaos, they're going to deny it anyway. They're never going to admit that. And so the denial means nothing. In other words, they would lie about it. And there's a long time precedent for this. That's what the U.S. did in Chile before the Pinochet coup. Nixon had told the CIA, make their economy scream. And so the CIA did everything they could to make the economy scream. And then some years before, 10 years before, in Iran, the CIA was involved in paying thugs to create chaos in the streets, violence and so forth as excuse for ousting Mossadegh. So you don't really know whether the CIA is behind all this, but we do know that socialism creates chaos. And, I think it's also an indictment of the U.S. government's proclivity toward, democracy. Maduro has been democratically elected. And so was Chavez. And so it shows our point that democracy often ends up with dictators, brutal dictators, and that the ideal is a free society, not a democratic society. Democracy can sometimes be the biggest threat to the freedom and well-being of a people. So I think there's various dimensions of this that are very fascinating that maybe would have taken another panel discussion to discuss it. But in any event, I think Venezuela ought to be left to the Venezuelans and any private Americans that want to get involved in the controversy, but leave the U.S. government out of it.
Yeah, that obviously was not the topic of the panel, so in a way it was a side issue. So while I was disappointed that the issue didn't really get engaged, I don't think Stone directly addressed the student. I don't think the student's question was as pointed and specific as it could have been. So it was disappointing in that sense. Again, it was good to see it raised. It was certainly fair game. If you're interested in the liberty of Americans, you ought to be interested in the liberty of Venezuelans and all other people. Not that we should be intervening, but you should not embrace a regime or speak, sympathetically about a regime which is not respecting the rights of the people in that particular country. So it was fair game, and so I'm happy that it was brought up. He knew it was going to be, so he wasn't caught by surprise, and I don't see that any problem came out of that. Maybe one of these days, libertarians will get to have a real discussion with Stone and people sort of in his category about consistency, about how freedom should apply to all people and all realms of people's lives.
Yeah, I thought we'd move into some of the other speakers we did mix in liberals with libertarians, and somebody might ask, well, why are you having liberals here? There's plenty of libertarian speakers, and the reason is because oftentimes liberals are better exponents of civil liberties and explaining the critical importance of civil liberties and a non-interventionist foreign policy and the national security state than libertarians are. And so we think it's important to bring those perspectives to students or to other audiences. And our first one was Jonathan Turley, who's a law professor at George Washington. He's absolutely fantastic speaker, a great defender of civil liberties. He had a great piece in the Washington Post a while back that we reprinted in our monthly journal, Future of Freedom. And he gave an absolutely fantastic as well as a humorous talk on civil liberties in America. He's ranked as one of the top 500 lawyers in America. He's got one of the most popular blogs among legal circles that you could ever find. And I thought his talk was just informative and entertaining. Sheldon, what did you think?
I agree. And then there's a pattern here throughout the day. I mean, not only was it a talk that was filled with information and valuable information to us as libertarians, but it was extremely well presented. He's a very personable guy, sort of the right amount of humor and just a nice personality. You see him on TV, CNN, and other places now and then. So, he's really good. He knows his stuff. He can talk about cases. He can talk about what the government's up to, why it violates Fourth Amendment considerations and things of that nature. It was a great way to kick it off. He's very easy to listen to. You don't get bored in there. You're not going to fall asleep. You're going to come away thinking, not only did I like that guy, I like what he had to say, and I learned a lot, and that's what you want from a speaker. I mean, what more could you ask?
Yeah, so we're posting his videotape later this week, and the second speaker was just absolutely outstanding, and that was Stephen Kinzer, who's like one of my heroes in this area. He's written fantastic books on foreign policy. If you want to learn the libertarian perspective on foreign policy, read Kinzer. I mean, he's got a great book on the Guatemala coup, the Iranian coup. They're called All the Shah's Men and Bitter Fruit. He's got a survey of regime change operations called Overthrow. But he's got this fantastic new book called The Brothers about John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles that's getting widely acclaimed, New York Times, Washington Post, and he's a dynamic speaker, and he gave people this perspective of the importance that the Dulles brothers played in U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War, and yet, ironically, how they've sort of been forgotten figures now. They're major figures during the 50s and early 60s, and now they've been largely forgotten, except maybe for people that fly into Dulles Airport. But I thought his talk was absolutely fantastic too, Sheldon.
Yeah, once again, another highly entertaining speaker. I mean, even if you just happen to stumble into that panel, into that talk, not knowing what the topic was going to be, I have a feeling you wouldn't have left. He was just riveting, but but in the sense light. In other words, it wasn't like a heavy kind of thing. It was he's got a great wit, and again full of information. It's just an ideal speaker. I'm a big fan of Kinzer. He's written, like you say, a series of really good books, and he's very important for libertarians because throughout my time in the libertarian movement, which has been going on quite a while now, like yours. There's not been, I'll put it this way, not as much interest in history and particularly the history of U.S. foreign policy that there should be. And he helps us fill that gap. Now, I'm not saying he's a libertarian. I have no reason to think he is. We probably have a lot of disagreements with him about, domestic economic policy. But his history of how U.S. presidents and secretaries of state and, other underlings have attempted to orchestrate events in the world, going back, before World War II. His book on overthrow, goes back to the coup in Hawaii when the U.S. annexed Hawaii in the late 19th century. So it goes back that far, at least. This is something that has characterized the official American mindset for a very long time. This attempt to orchestrate events in the world, to manage events in the world. For all kinds of reasons, economic, but also political, prestige, just the sense that if we're not number one, somebody else will be, and we can't stand that. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. And he documents it. It's good, solid history based on government documents and other sorts of documents that reveal what the government's been up to. So this latest book, which I confess I haven't read yet, but is a very important subject because Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA under Eisenhower, a little while under Kennedy, and John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State under Eisenhower, are extremely important figures. And he talked about it in his talk, and of course it'll be in his book as well. They're biographies of these two men. They came out of a very prominent law firm which represented the biggest corporations that had interests around the world that needed protecting, and therefore they looked to the U.S. government. So they were the go-between between corporations and government to make sure that the corporate interests were looked after in Latin America and other places, Iran probably. So you came out of that talk learning a lot, and you'll profit by reading any of Kinzer's books.
Yeah, I agree with you on the books. I mean, my feel, if anybody ever asks me, hey, how can I get up to snuff on foreign policy from a libertarian perspective, I would say read all of Kinzer's books, read all of Chalmers Johnson's books, and especially his trilogy. That's Chalmers Johnson. He's got Blowback, The Sorrows of Empire, and I forget the third one. And then Bob Higgs's books that are just absolutely fantastic on the military-industrial complex, the national security state. Of course, some of the stuff that Rothbard was writing during the Cold War. That there you can really get a grasp of things. And speaking of Bob Higgs, he was one of our libertarian presenters, and Higgs is always fantastic. I mean, you get the pure, unadulterated case for libertarianism on foreign policy and the national security state. And I think there were some wide-eyed people getting that from Higgs because there's just no one that can present this case better than Higgs, especially this concept of, how the state creates these crises or takes advantage of crises to magnify its power, and then it never returns back to its original size. So you have this ratcheting effect where government's always getting bigger and more powerful with each crisis. So I thought he was fantastic from a libertarian perspective.
Right. They're unlike with Turley and Kinzer and the members of the panel, the Stone, Kuznick, and Scale panel. There with Higgs, of course, you get an all-around solid libertarian. His talks are always very hard-hitting. He knows a heck of a lot. You just need to look at his books. But start with Crisis and Leviathan, and you have a great history of how government expands under cover of crisis, sometimes imagined, sometimes simply overblown. And he's got not only the theory, but the details of several historical incidents, which are every libertarian should be familiar with. One thing he points out is, as you say, the growth in government really accelerates during a crisis or building up to a crisis and then through the crisis. And then while it maybe sheds some things, some powers, at least after the crisis, the growth rate in government spending and just sort of growth rate in other senses is now a steeper slope than it was before the crisis. So even if it lowers the tax rate or something like that, things never go, like you say, go back to the pre-crisis situation. The crisis lives on. Plus, even emergency powers are just put on the shelf, available to be taken down on a moment's notice. Government, look, politicians are opportunists. They like power. Power is their game. Power is their life. And they're going to be looking for opportunities. In a sense, they're entrepreneurial. They're going to look for opportunities to increase their power and prestige, and often monetary profits as well. Nobody tops Higgs.
Yeah, and then we brought Jameel Jaffer from the ACLU. And the ACLU has been absolutely fantastic on civil liberties and the national security, state, and foreign policy ever since 9/11. I mean, they've hung in there. They've stood fast, not just when Bush was in, but also they continued against the Obama administration when Obama started embracing everything that Bush was doing. And they have filed suits on what the government's been doing on the NSA spying, and before we even had the Ed Snowden revelations, they were litigating. And so Jaffer is one of their premier litigators. He was one of the litigators that successfully challenged the various aspects of the Patriot Act. He's a monitor at Guantanamo. So he was the perfect person to come and talk to us about the latest updates of what's going on with respect to what the courts are doing, what the Obama administration is doing. He was a soft-spoken guy, but boy, his talk was just filled with information that brought people up to date on what's going on in the war on terrorism.
Yeah, I think it's very good to bring somebody from the ACLU to the ISFL conference. Let them learn about the ACLU, meet a guy, hear him talk, and realize that, again, while there's not going to be perfect agreement on all matters with them, there's a huge overlap, and we have a common interest in exposing government surveillance and abuse of people, like in Guantanamo. It wasn't that long ago when George H.W. Bush ran against Michael Dukakis in 1988, where one of Bush's favorite lines about Dukakis was that he was a card-carrying member of the ACLU. So for Republicans, that's a dirty word. They act like it's some sort of subversive organization, which tells you a great deal. So most conservatives and most Republicans would probably still use that line today if they thought it was appropriate. So that's why I think it's important that we brought an ACLU representative in front of this group of libertarians.
Yeah, because they would consider not just the economics of the ACLU bad, which we would consider also, but since conservatives are so bad on civil liberties, they would consider that their ardent defense of civil liberties and the Bill of Rights to be bad too, when we consider it an outstanding, great thing. We had two libertarians follow with John Glazer and Scott Horton. Glazer is great writer. His articles appear regularly in the Washington Times, a conservative publication, as well as other places. And Horton's the interviewer on his own talk show that's had the most unbelievably fantastic array of guests on foreign policy and civil liberties of all ideologies. We had them jointly on a panel, which turned out to be great. Horton was a little bit late because of the flight cancellations with the bad weather we were getting in Washington, but I thought they both just fantastic job presenting the libertarian case on what's going on in the war on terrorism and foreign policy. Yeah, I'm big fans of both of those guys because you and I have both been on Scott's show, and like you say, he brings the best people on foreign policy and civil liberties to listeners. He has the top people. He's been doing this since 2003. He's got over 3,000 interviews. You can find his archive online, Scott Horton's show. So we're very glad to have him there, affiliated with FFF. And I'm also a big fan of John Glazer. He's written for Future of Freedom a few times. He'll be writing more. He is a blogger at anywar.com, where he has great insights about what the U.S. is up to around the world. And very important, I think, to bring those two guys in front of this SFL audience. Yeah, and then we wrap everything up with Libertarian Angle Live. Sheldon and I did a program there on our theme, the theme of this conference within a conference, civil liberties, foreign policy, the national security state, and where we talked in a spontaneous conversation, just like we're doing here, on the vital importance of civil liberties, why we felt it was important to bring this theme to the students at the Students for Liberty conference, why we included people from the left on this thing. And so we had a lot of fun, and then we engaged the audience with some Q&A, and so we invite you to watch that program. So you get an extra bonus this week once we post it online. You get Libertarian Angle, this one, as well as the one we did at the Students for Liberty conference. In any event, that wraps up the show. We've run out of time. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy our videos of the presentations at the Students for Liberty conference. They're all going on live this week at FFF.org. If you're not subscribing to FFF Daily, I'd like to invite you to do so. We strive to make that one of the best libertarian editorial op-ed pages on the internet. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.